Episode 3. Ashes of Hestia, The Last Archive. Orbital entry. Hestia. Sensor sweeps revealed the wrong kind of silence. Not the quiet of abandonment, but something deliberate. I leaned over Rin's station, watching atmospheric signatures shift across her displays like guilty shadows trying to hide. Talk to me, Rin.
She flicked through layers of spectral analysis. Her brow furrowed in that particular way that meant she was chasing ghosts in the data. Suppression patterns. Somebody down there is actively damping signal traffic. She tapped a marker on the display. These atmospheric alterations aren't natural drift. Someone's trying not to be found.
Mara's voice crackled over the bridge comms from engineering.
Explains why we nearly flew past this rock. If they're hiding this hard, what are they hiding from?
Good question. I pulled up the tactical overlay. Hestia was the fourth planet in what used to be the colony transit corridor for our scattered generation fleet. Before everything broke apart and we became the Elysium, Hestia was supposed to be a way station, a place to refuel and restock, not a graveyard with trust issues.
Captain, I'm finding metadata markers in these suppression patterns. Old ones. Pre-breakup codes.
My gut tightened. You're saying they've been hiding since before the fleet fractured?
Or they inherited the tech from someone who was.
I stared at the planet on the main display. Hestia looked wounded, scarred by time and survival. Beneath those clouds were people who'd learned to live by closing themselves off to the universe. And we were about to knock on their door. What about the Pioneer and Arcadia manifest data? Any matches?
Running cross-reference now. Her fingers moved across the interface, pulling up personnel records and ship logs. I'm seeing possible matches. 6 names from the Pioneer crew roster show up in older Hestia settlement records. Could be survivors who made it here before the suppression protocols went active.
6 survivors out of how many?
The Pioneer carried 427 souls. If only 6 made it to Hestia, we're looking at a 98% loss rate.
The numbers hit like a physical blow. 421 people who didn't make it. 421 families, still waiting for answers that would never come. The weight of it settled into my chest. Familiar and crushing. Prep the Sparrow for insertion. Surface team to Bay 3 in 30 minutes. Full environmental kits and diplomatic protocols.
Diplomatic?
They're survivors, not enemies. Yet, dight. The Sparrow shook like a dying thing on the way down. Atmospheric entry over Hestia felt personal. Like the planet itself resented our presence. Through the viewport, I watched heat bloom across the shuttle's nose as we carved through layers of suppressed air. Mara sat across from me in the passenger compartment, her engineering pack strapped tight between her boots. She looked calm, which meant she was calculating failure modes in her head.
Rough descent. Local atmosphere's running hot. Either their climate control finally collapsed, or someone's burning something they shouldn't.
Comforting thought.
I live to comfort.
The Sparrow's pilot, Chen, called back from the cockpit, saying they'd established surface contact and the settlement was directing them to a landing zone with quarantine protocols required. I unbuckled and moved forward to the cockpit. The settlement sprawled below us. A patchwork of prefabricated colonial structures held together by improvisation and desperation. Solar arrays tilted at awkward angles, scavenged from who knows how many wrecks. Water reclamation towers stood like rusted sentinels at the perimeter. Quarantine protocols. They're worried about us. Chen adjusted the approach vector and said they couldn't blame the settlers for being cautious. Strangers from orbit could be here to strip them clean. He had a point. I watched the landing zone grow larger. A flat expanse of cracked permacrete ringed by portable barriers. No welcome committee, but I could see figures moving in the shadows of nearby structures. Watching. Waiting. Waiting. The Sparrow touched down with a hydraulic hiss. And the moment the ramp deployed, the weight of Hestia's atmosphere hit them, thin and sharp like breathing through old cloth. Mara descended first, her scanner already out and sweeping for environmental hazards. A woman emerged from the nearest structure. Lean. Weathered, with scars that mapped a hard life across her face and arms, she carried herself with defensive authority, the kind born from too many years on the edge of collapse. I'm Tomas Eri, commander of the Elysium. We're here to offer aid and recover any survivors from the Pioneer or Arcadia. She studied him for a long moment. Eyes hard as hull plating. Kale introduced herself as security chief and gestured toward the settlement, saying they'd forgive the caution because strangers tend to take more than they give. We're not here to take. Kale said, everyone says that. Then turned and started walking toward the settlement, directing them to the quarantine bay. Mara fell into step beside me as we followed Kale through the settlement's outer perimeter. The structures looked functional, but worn. Every surface showing signs of constant repair. Pipes had been rerouted so many times they formed metal vines along the walls. Solar panels bore the scorch marks of improvised voltage regulation.
They've been cannibalizing their own infrastructure for years. This place is held together by hope and wire.
Kale glanced back and said they weren't wrong. That hope's been in short supply lately. The quarantine bay turned out to be a converted storage module. Clean, but Spartan. Kale sealed them inside with practiced efficiency. Her expression unreadable, saying someone would run baseline medical checks and if they were clean, they'd talk terms. The panel went dark. I looked at Mara, who'd already pulled out her portable engineering terminal and was scanning the module's systems. Terms. She's expecting negotiation.
She's expecting us to want something. And she's right. We want access to their records, their survivors, their data. The question is what we're willing to trade for it.
I sat down on one of the module's fold-out bunks, feeling the weight of command settle back on my shoulders. Outside, Hestia's survivors moved through their routines, guarded and wary. And somewhere in this settlement was the last archive, a fragmentary data trove that might explain how our fleet broke apart in the first place, if they'd even let us see it. Settlement interior. Quarantine bay. 2 hours into quarantine. A medical officer arrived. She moved with practiced efficiency, running baseline scans with equipment that looked like it had been repaired more times than replaced. She didn't speak much, just nodded when the scans came back clean. The medical officer said they were cleared and that Kale was waiting in the central hub. The central hub turned out to be a converted operations center. Its walls lined with status displays showing resource levels, water reserves, and power distribution. Everything ran thin. Razor-edge margins that would make our own logistics team weep. Kale stood at the central console, arms crossed. 2 other figures flanked her, an older man with the careful hands of a technician, and a younger woman whose hollow eyes spoke of chronic dehydration. Kale said she'd explained the situation. They had 63 survivors on Hestia, down from 92 the year prior. Water reserves ran at 30% capacity, power at 57%, and their reclamation array was failing piece by piece. Down from 92. What happened to the others? Kale's expression hardened. She said some died from dehydration when the first reclamation unit failed 3 years back. Others from respiratory failure when the air scrubbers couldn't keep up with the dust storms. A few just gave up, walked out into the desert and didn't come back. The silence that followed felt heavy. I'd seen death in space. The cold mathematics of life, support failure and orbital decay. But this was different, slower and more deliberate. Watching your world die around you, one system at a time. What do you need? The technician, identified by Kale as Marcus from the engineering bay, said they needed parts they couldn't manufacture, expertise they didn't have, and time they were running out of. The young woman beside him stayed silent, her hollow eyes tracking every word.
I can look at your reclamation systems. If the damage isn't catastrophic, we can fabricate replacement components on the Elysium.
Marcus's expression shifted, hope flickering across his features like a candle in a draft. Kale remained guarded. Kale asked what they wanted in return. Because nobody helps for free out here. Information. Records. We're looking for survivors from the Pioneer and Arcadia, and we need access to any data archives from before the fleet breakup. There's something called the Last Archive. We think it's here. The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with secrets. Kale and Marcus exchanged a glance, some wordless communication passing between them. Kale said she knew where the archive was, and that it was sealed for a reason. The information inside could split what was left of their fragile settlement apart. It might also explain what happened to the fleet, why we scattered, how we can prevent it from happening again. Marcus said they'd been arguing about opening it for 5 years, that it was damaged and partially encrypted, and they lacked the tools to properly decrypt it without risking data corruption.
That's what I do. Data recovery, decryption, archival preservation. If you let me look at it, I can extract what's salvageable without causing further damage.
Kale studied Rin with the same hard assessment she'd given me at the landing zone. Kale proposed a deal. Mara would fix their water reclamation system. Rin would attempt to recover the archive without breaking it, and in return they'd share whatever information was extracted. But she warned that, if the archive revealed something dangerous, they'd have to make hard choices together. Agreed. Water reclamation facility. Settlement perimeter.
The reclamation array looked like someone had been holding it together with spite and improvisation. I ran my scanner along the primary filtration housing, watching temperature gradients bloom across my display in shades of warning red. This should have been replaced 10 years ago.
Marcus, who'd accompanied her to the facility, gave a tired laugh and said they knew that, adding wryly they'd been busy surviving. I'd come along to observe, partly to understand the scope of their needs, and partly because standing idle while my crew worked felt wrong. The young woman from the hub, the one with hollow eyes, stood near the array's control station. She watched Mara work with quiet intensity, like she was memorizing every movement. Marcus introduced her as Tessa, explaining she'd been training as an apprentice engineer before their systems started failing faster than they could learn to fix them.
Tessa, can you pull up the maintenance logs for the past 6 months?
Tessa moved to the console with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across the interface. Data scrolled across the screen, a chronicle of deterioration.
You've been running the primary coolant loop 20 degrees over safe operating temperature.
Marcus admitted they had no choice, explaining that if they dropped below current output, the settlement's water rations would have to be cut again. They'd already lost 3 people to dehydration this year.
I turned to face him fully, my scanner forgotten in my hand. You're sacrificing long-term survival for short-term stability. This array is going to fail catastrophically within 3 months, maybe less.
Marcus said they knew that too, his voice flat with resignation. Can you fix it?
I can stabilize it. Full repairs will need components we'll have to fabricate on the Elysium. But I can reroute the coolant system and install thermal regulators that'll buy them time.
I watched Mara already pulling tools from her pack, her movements sharp and decisive. This was what she did, what she was built for, translating engineering into survival. Tessa moved closer, watching as Mara began disassembling the coolant housing.
Hand me that torque wrench from my pack. The one with the blue grip.
Tessa found it instantly and passed it over. Mara worked in focused silence for several minutes, removing damaged components and examining connection points.
Tessa, your filtration pressure readings. What's normal for this system?
Tessa rattled off specifications without hesitation, her voice gaining confidence. Marcus watched her with something like pride.
Good. Wang, you know your systems. That's half the battle. She pulled a thermal regulator from her pack, one of our spare units. This is going to hurt our own inventory, but you need it more.
Marcus started to protest, but Mara cut him off, saying she didn't fix things halfway. I keyed my comm to the Elysium. Bridge, this is Eri. Have fabrication start a production run on thermal regulators and coolant seals. Standard colonial spec. Send down the first batch with the next supply run. The bridge acknowledged, and I closed the channel. We'll get you through this. Marcus looked at me, then at Mara, something unguarded finally showing in his expression. He said they'd stopped believing anyone was coming, that they thought they'd been written off as lost. The Elysium doesn't write people off. That's not who we are. Archive Vault. Settlement sublevel. The last archive sat in what used to be a maintenance sublevel, sealed behind a blast door with manual locks. Kale worked the door mechanism herself, muscle and leverage where electronics had long since failed. The door groaned open to reveal a chamber that smelled of recycled air and old fear. Emergency lighting flickered along the ceiling, casting shadows that moved like ghosts.
This is it.
Kale said it wasn't impressive, but it was all they had, warning them not to damage it. I followed Rin inside. The archive hardware occupied a reinforced equipment rack along the back wall, its surfaces dulled by years of neglect. Status lights blinked in irregular patterns, some sequence that suggested partial operation or slowed death. She approached the rack like it might bite, her portable interface already out and scanning.
Power's unstable. Storage medium is degraded, but not catastrophic.
She looked back at me.
I can work with this, but it's going to take time.
How much time?
Hours. Maybe a full day if the encryption's as complex as I think it is.
Kale said she'd post security outside and that they'd bring meals and water. She paused at the door, looking back at Rin, warning her to remember that whatever was in there, people had died keeping it secret.
I'll treat it with care.
The door closed, leaving me and Rin alone with decades of buried truth. She connected her interface to the archive's primary port, fingers moving across virtual keyboards with practiced precision. Data began scrolling across her screen, fragmentary and corrupted.
This is worse than I thought. The storage medium has suffered cascade failures. Entire blocks of data are just gone, and what's left is fragmented across multiple damaged sectors.
Can you recover anything useful?
Maybe. I'm seeing file headers for ship, manifests, personnel records, and what looks like transit system logs from before the breakup. She paused, eyes narrowing at something on her display. Wait. There's an encrypted partition. Heavy encryption, military grade.
My pulse quickened. What would they need military encryption for?
That's what I'm going to find out.
I watched her work for a moment, then moved to examine the rest of the archive vault. The walls showed signs of hasty reinforcement, structural bracing welded at awkward angles. Someone had been worried about this chamber collapsing, worried enough to sacrifice aesthetics for survival. Along one wall, I found a makeshift memorial. Names etched into metal plating, dozens of them. Pioneer crew, Arcadia personnel, and names from ships I didn't recognize, all marked with dates and brief epitaphs. Rin, look at this. She glanced over, her expression softening.
They've been keeping records. Remembering.
Even when they thought no one would ever see it. Even when they thought they'd been written off as lost.
Makes what we're doing here matter even more.
Hours passed in focused silence. I watched Rin work. Her concentration absolute. She'd built algorithms to reconstruct damaged data, threading together fragments like assembling a shattered vase. Occasionally she'd murmur to herself, technical observations or quiet frustrations.
I've got something.
I moved to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at the screen. Text resolved from corruption, fragmentary but readable.
Transit system logs. These are from the Pioneer's last recorded jump before the fleet fractured. She scrolled through the data, her expression growing more troubled. Captain, look at these anomaly reports. They logged gravitational variance in the transit corridor. Fluctuations that don't match natural phenomena.
Could it be equipment malfunction?
Not according to this. Multiple ships reported the same anomalies, synchronized across the fleet. And here, look at this timestamp. Someone tried to send a general alert 37 minutes before the Pioneer went dark. The alert was blocked.
Blocked? By who?
She pulled up another fragment. Command authority override. Someone in Fleet Command prevented the warning from going out.
I stared at the screen, feeling the implications settle like lead in my stomach. The fleet hadn't just fractured due to random system failures. Someone had made choices, decisions that led to the scattering and all the death that followed. Can you recover more? Names? Reasons?
I'm trying, but the data's corrupted. What I can tell you is that whoever blocked that alert knew the risks. This wasn't ignorance, Captain. This was a decision.
The door opened behind us. Kale entered carrying water and ration packs. Her expression tight. She asked if they'd found anything yet. I turned to face her. Weighing truth against consequences. We found evidence that the fleet breakup wasn't entirely accidental. Someone in command made choices that contributed to the disaster. Kale set down the supplies slowly. Her movements careful. She said she'd suspected as much, admitting they all had, because the official story about random system failures never made sense to anyone who actually understood the technology.
There's more in here. Evidence. Maybe enough to identify who made the call. But recovering it without destroying what's left is going to be delicate.
Kale asked what happened next. Whether they'd take the archive and leave them wondering, or share what they found. We share everything, but we do it carefully, with context. This information could fracture what's left of the fleet if we're not thoughtful about how we release it. Kale nodded slowly and said, that was the right answer. She warned them to be ready for the consequences. Because truth had a way of burning through good intentions. Elysium Bridge. Orbital position, Hestia. 3 days after descending to Hestia's surface. I stood on the Elysium's bridge facing a decision that would define my command. The last archive data sat in Rin's secure partition, fragmentary but damning. Around me, the senior staff had assembled for an emergency council. Dr. Lena Des from Medical sat at the conference table. Her expression troubled. The Ironworks representative, an engineer named Pavel, looked skeptical. A civilian leader named Chen, who'd lost family on the Pioneer, watched me with barely contained anger. Dr. Das spoke first, arguing they couldn't sit on information this significant. People deserved to know what happened to their families and why the fleet scattered. Pavel countered, saying the data was fragmentary and incomplete. They'd be starting a panic based on partial evidence, and the fleet was barely holding together as it was. Chen leaned forward, her voice sharp with grief, demanding to know if the archive confirmed that the pioneer's loss could have been prevented. Rin, present your findings.
She stood, activating the main display. Transit system logs appeared, annotated with her analysis. The data shows gravitational anomalies in the transit corridor 37 minutes before the Pioneer went dark. Multiple ships detected the anomalies. The Pioneer sent an alert. That alert was blocked by Fleet Command override.
The room erupted. Chen demanded to know who'd blocked it, her voice rising. Pavel argued they couldn't be sure the override was intentional, that it could have been automated safety protocols misinterpreting data.
The override was manual. Someone made the choice.
Dr. Das asked the critical question. Whether revealing this would help them find the other scattered ships, or just tear apart what remained. I let them argue for several minutes. Voices overlapping in anger and fear and desperate hope. Finally, I raised my hand, and the room fell silent. We release a controlled disclosure. Rin's full analysis with all the context we can provide. We present it to the Fleet Council with recommendations for a joint investigation into the transit anomalies. We don't hide the truth, but we frame it responsibly. Chen protested. Saying controlled disclosure was just another way of saying cover-up. It's a way of saying we don't start a civil war while we're barely surviving. The person who blocked that alert may still be out there, on another ship, in another settlement. If we want justice, we need unity first. If we want answers, we need to work together. Pavel asked about Hestia. Whether their settlement would be part of this investigation or abandoned again.
We're not abandoning them. The parts I promised are already fabricated. We'll make regular supply runs and integrate their settlement into our resource network. They're fleet now, same as the rest of us.
Dr. Das said that was the right thing to do and called for a vote on the disclosure plan. The council voted 5-2 in favor. I felt the weight of it settle across my shoulders. That particular burden of command. We'd chosen truth over silence, but truth came with costs we couldn't yet calculate. Rin, prepare the disclosure package. Include all recovered data, your analysis, and our recommendations. Schedule a fleet-wide assembly for tomorrow at 1400 hours.
Understood, Captain.
Settlement Central Hub. Hestia Surface. The night before we departed Hestia, Kale invited me to what passed for the settlement's common area. It was a converted storage bay with mismatched furniture and a makeshift kitchen that smelled of reconstituted protein and hope. The settlers gathered there most evenings. Kale explained, to share meals and pretend they were still a community instead of just survivors. Kale said they wanted to say thank you before the Elysium crew left, noting that Mara's repairs had bought them at least 2 years if they were careful. Mara doesn't do anything halfway. Mara sat at one of the tables with Tessa and Marcus, showing them technical diagrams on her portable terminal. Tessa looked animated in a way I hadn't seen before, asking questions and pointing at design elements. Kale said Tessa hadn't smiled like that in months, and that Mara had given her something to hope for, the idea that engineering could fix things instead of just watching them fall apart. Rin stood near the makeshift kitchen, talking with several settlers who'd worked on preserving the last archive. They were discussing data preservation techniques, voices, technical and focused. You could come with us. The whole settlement. The Elysium has capacity for 63 more people, and we could use your skills. Kale was quiet for a moment, looking around at the battered structures, the improvised repairs, the life they'd built from scraps and determination. Kale said this was their home, such as it was, and they built it from nothing when the fleet left them behind. She admitted it wasn't much, but it was theirs, and leaving felt like admitting defeat. It's not defeat to accept help, and you wouldn't be leaving. We'll establish regular supply runs, integrate your settlement into our resource network. You'd be part of the fleet again, just in place instead of in orbit. Kale considered this, her expression thoughtful. She said they'd discuss it with the council, that some of them might take the offer, especially the families with young children. But she'd stay. Someone needed to hold things together. Fair enough. The offer stands, for anyone who wants it. Later. After the meal had ended and the settlers had dispersed, I found Mara standing outside the hub, looking up at the Elysium's distant light moving across the night sky.
We're really going to tell them about the archive, about the blocked alert.
We are.
It's going to change everything. People are going to demand answers we don't have. Accountability for decisions made decades ago by people who might be dead.
I know. But the alternative is keeping secrets that will eat us from the inside. At least this way, we face it together.
She looked at me. Her expression, serious. You're a better commander than you give yourself credit for.
Ask me again after the fleet assembly. I might be an unemployed commander by tomorrow evening.
Doubt it. You made the right call.
I hope she was right. Elysium Bridge. Orbital position, Hestia. The fleet assembly convened at exactly 1400 hours. Every ship in communication range had representatives linked into the broadcasting. Their faces filling my tactical display in a grid of expectation and worry. Thank you all for joining this assembly on short notice. What I'm about to share comes from the last archive recovered from Hestia, and it concerns the events that led to our fleet's fracture. I nodded to Rin, and she activated the data package. Transit logs, gravitational anomaly reports, and the blocked alerts scrolled across every connected display. I watched their faces as they read, seeing shock transform into anger, grief, and determination. The data is fragmentary, but clear. The Pioneer detected transit anomalies 37 minutes before they went dark. They sent an alert. That alert was blocked by manual override from Fleet Command. The audio channels erupted with voices. Some demanded names. Others questioned the data's authenticity. A few went silent, processing implications. I raised my voice. We don't have names. We don't have complete answers. What we have is evidence that our fleet's fracture wasn't entirely accidental, and that someone made choices that led to the loss of ships and thousands of lives. Chen, the civilian leader who'd lost family on the Pioneer, spoke up over the comms, her voice tight with emotion. She asked what they were going to do about it. I watched the votes accumulate on my display. Each one a small act of faith or fear. Some ships voted quickly, decisively. Others took time, internal debates playing out in real-time delays. When the votes were tallied, the result was 68% in favor. Not unanimous, but strong enough to move forward. I felt something release in my chest. Tension I'd been holding for days. 68% meant consensus, meant movement, meant we had a chance.
That's better than I expected.
That's better than I hoped for. Pavel from the Ironworks asked the practical question. How they'd resource this investigation when they were already stretched thin, trying to survive.
The settlements like Hestia have surviving records and expertise we've lost. We bring them back into the fleet's network, share resources and knowledge. We stop thinking of ourselves as separate ships, trying to survive and start acting like an actual fleet again.
Dr. Des added that they had a moral obligation to the survivors they'd left behind. That any investigation that didn't include rescue operations was just politics dressed up as justice. Agreed. This is both. We search, we rescue, we investigate. All of it. The assembly voted. When the votes were tallied, the result was 68% in favor. Not unanimous, but strong enough to move forward. I felt something release in my chest. Tension I'd been holding for days. Then we have our mandate. Task force assignments will go out within 12 hours. All ships are to submit available personnel and resources for coordination. We leave for the first search zone in 72 hours. The assembly closed, and I sat back in my command chair. Rin approached from her station, her expression cautiously optimistic. She said they'd actually done it, brought the fleet together instead of tearing it apart. For now, the hard part comes next, when we actually have to deliver on these promises.
Well, that's what we do. Deliver.
Elysium observation deck. Departure vector. The night before we departed Hestia's orbit, I stood in the observation deck watching the planet turn below. The settlement's lights were barely visible against the dark landscape, tiny points of defiance against a hostile universe. Mara joined me at the viewport, 2 cups of terrible ship's coffee in her hands. She passed one to me without comment.
Tessa asked if she could apprentice on the Elysium once she's old enough. Told her to finish her training on Hestia first. Then we'd talk.
She's got potential.
She's got heart. That matters more.
We stood in comfortable silence, drinking terrible coffee and watching Hestia's slow rotation. You think we did the right thing? Revealing the archive data?
I think we did the only thing. Secrets have weight, and we were already carrying too many.
The investigation's going to take years. We might never find who blocked that alert.
Maybe. But at least we're looking. At least we're trying. That's better than pretending it didn't happen.
Rin's voice came over the ship comms, announcing they were receiving a transmission from Hestia's surface. Put it through. Kale's voice filled the observation deck, saying they wanted to formally join the Elysium network. They'd send 12 people with the next supply run, mostly families with children. The rest would stay to maintain the settlement, but they'd contribute what they could to the investigation. Understood. Welcome to the fleet, Hestia. The transmission closed. I looked at Mara, who was smiling into her coffee.
See? We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something.
Feels fragile.
Everything worth building starts fragile. That's how you know it's real.
The Elysium's engines hummed through the deck plating, preparing for departure. Ahead lay the first search zone, the beginning of an investigation that would reshape what remained of our scattered fleet. Behind us, Hestia's survivors held their ground, no longer alone. I finished my coffee and set the cup aside. All right, let's go find some answers. The Elysium broke orbit at 0600 hours. Acceleration, gentle but purposeful. Hestia receded into the distance, a world of scars and stubborn hope. The fleet moved forward together, united by truth and the promise of justice, delayed but not abandoned. The last archive had given them a thread to follow, a path toward understanding. What they'd find at the end of that path remained uncertain, but for the first time since the fracture, they were hunting for answers as one fleet, one purpose. And that, Thomas thought as he watched the stars wheel by, was something worth fighting for.